the Jesus way,
Oh, the Jesus way
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way,
Oh, the Jesus way
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace begin with me.
We moved to Oklahoma when I was 12, and in high school there, it was something that I didn't really know anything about, but I knew that you didn't wear green on Thursday because it meant you were queer, and that was a bad thing. And there were gay jokes, and then when I don't remember if I was in college or shortly after, I read a book called Sappho Was a Right-On Woman, written by a couple of lesbians, and they talked in that book about how it felt to be growing up knowing that they were different, that they were attracted to women, and knowing that wearing green on a certain day or some other color meant you were queer and that was a bad thing, how that felt to them and how it felt to have to laugh at gay jokes so that nobody would suspect that they were. And somehow that impacted me because I was taught growing up in the church that it was about love and compassion and that you didn't hurt people. And I was mortified to realize that by participating in those little green on Thursday things, that I was hurting people. I mean, there were probably, it wasn't a large school, I'll bet there were some gay people there or lesbians. And that was horrible for me. And that kind of turned my whole thinking around and thinking that I don't know, it was just a very educational book for me.
The first time I ever heard anything about it, I was in high school, going to a small school in Idaho, and there was little sort of talk about 2 or 3 boys who go to Sun Valley on the weekend together. And I really didn't know too much about it, but I happened to know the boys and thought they were all right. They were friends of mine, acquaintances, and I didn't ask anybody else where they went on the weekend, so I figured it was none of my business or what they were doing. That was sort of my first reaction. When I went to college, 3 of my very best friends were gay. I didn't know they were gay at the time. They didn't come out saying they were gay, but they ended up being my very best friends. They all went into different ministries, 1 a teacher and 2 into the church ministry, and did not come out until later on in life. Because in the 1950s, it was not very helpful to be gay and be within the church.
Hello, I'm Brent Carlson.
And I'm Beth Merrill.
This is a story from Peace Church of the Brethren of Portland, Oregon. The Church of the Brethren began 300 years ago with 8 men and women in Germany claiming the New Testament as their creed and faith and practice, and following Jesus as their example of living.
Since then, the church has expanded to many countries with different races and ethnic groups, all finding validity in the principles these founders chose to live by as they followed the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Most brethren specifically focus on the Sermon on the Mount as the core of their beliefs. In 300 years, the world has changed many times. As these changes occurred, the church and its people have been challenged by many issues and adjusted to new attitudes about slavery, women's rights, politics, democracy, and war. Now we are faced with another challenge, the end to the don't ask and don't tell policy in the church.
The role of gay members in the church has been a conflicting issue brought before annual conference for several decades. Christians, conservative and liberal, want to do the right thing. They just don't agree on what the right thing to do is.
We know there have been gay people in cultures throughout history and around the world. So I'm curious, what did Jesus say?
In Mark 12, Jesus comments about the 2 great commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind and all of your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Then, in John 15, Jesus says, in both verses 12 and 17, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. As far as I'm able to find out by reading the New Testament and talking to different ministers and pastors, Jesus said nothing about the homosexual issue. Homosexual orientation was not a concept in Western civilization until the 19th century. In fact, the word homosexual did not even exist until the late 1800s. What did Jesus say? Twice in John 15, he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you."
In this program, we are going to discuss the experience of Peace Church as it dealt with the issue over the past 40 years and eventually became a welcoming and affirming congregation. There have been homosexual members in the Church of the Brethren for many years. We didn't know about it because we were never told. Our homosexual members felt that they had to keep the secret to themselves.
Many families in the church have had gay members but never discussed it, in or outside their family. The participants in this program are, or were, all members of the Church of the Brethren. We encourage you to listen to their stories, to learn about their struggles, and to imagine that this may be a story about your friends, your neighbors, your family, or your church.
One thing you need to know is this story has a happy ending.
When I was a kid, there were two bachelors living in a house in our little village, and Dad said, "Don't stop at their house." So that might have been an introduction, I don't know.
I had two first cousins from the same family, a boy and a girl, who were older than I was, but I was aware probably, late elementary school, junior high, that they were different, and particularly the boy, the man, my first cousin, was dismissed from the Army, discharged, a dishonorable discharge, and so the family all knew that that was the reason why he'd been discharged.
The first inkling I had, I used to say it was at age 13, but I think it was a little younger, because I think I was in 6th grade at the time, and I have, 11, 12, something like that. And the first real awareness I had was I would be sitting with my friends, before class started, and they've got like whatever teenage magazine was popular at the time, and they're looking through and they're pointing out all the really cute, the idols, the cute rock star, the guys, and I was sitting there going, okay, yeah, I guess they're cute, but I'm looking at all the women, the Charlie's Angel types or whatever, whoever was featured in the magazine, and going, it just started dawning on me that the kinds of interests or the kind of attraction that my friends had for the guys, I didn't feel, but I was feeling the same sort of thing for the women. And it kind of started clicking that, oh, I'm not really like the other kids. I'm attracted to women. I'm not interested in men.
But from my own experience, I was as baffled as I could possibly be to find myself attracted in a sexual way toward male peers when I was 11 or 12, and terrified by that. Why?
We know that there are families all over the country who have been struggling with this for years. Whether you know it or not, there are families in your community struggling with this issue also.
In the mid-1960s, significant cultural changes led many people to acknowledge they were homosexual because they were beginning to realize the cultural distortions and misconceptions that prevailed against them. Gay people no longer wanted to or would continue to live in secret and in fear. The church was in the midst of this change and struggle to discern the will of God in light of new psychological and scientific information.
40 years ago, Portland Peace Church of the Brethren began facing this problem. One of our deacons, a pastor's son with deep Brethren roots, a married man, father of 6 children, discovered that he couldn't live as a Christian anymore and keep the secret of being gay. He didn't want to be gay, but he knew he was. In fact, he would learn over time that he was actually bisexual. He was called by his conscience and his God to be honest with himself and others. Jim shared with us his decision to come out.
And I really had an epiphany that what God really had in, what my purpose in life was to be. That I could be myself and still be a Christian and still, be a follower of Christ.
You said, God spoke to me Said, you cannot love me and be dishonest to yourself or anyone else.
Exactly.
You have trusted me all your life. Where is your faith?
Right. So I had to step out on faith. Just like when I moved down here, I stepped out on faith. But that's another story.
And then one Sunday morning you talked in Sunday school.
Right. Andy told me he had wanted me to come out in the class. And I did, and so anyway, I came out to the Sunday school class. It was, people hugged me, we cried, it was, I'm gonna get emotional. It was really a great experience.
Not the blame and the judgment you were afraid
Right,
of.
exactly. And the fear I had for my kids, because as a parent, you're always worried about your children, and how are your children going to be affected by when you come out. And you know, I had always been an activist, and I just don't do things halfway.
Well, you were concerned about your job.
Right.
And just tell us a little bit, maybe a short little bit about that, because you were afraid coming out might cost you your job.
Right, exactly.
Because you were in the grocery store business, there wasn't a lot of acceptance of gay people.
Right.
Or so the people thought. Anyway.
Right. Back in the late, well, this is in the 70s now. In the early 70s, there was a lot of discrimination. And I had done several small local broadcasts about being gay, about being a gay Christian, getting custody of my children. She wanted to do an hour program, but she wanted to have it was going to be syndicated nationally, be on national TV. And even though I was out to people that I worked with and that, I was not really out to the whole world, so to speak. And it aired on Sunday, on Super Bowl Sunday. So on the television, you know, they kept and of course the game goes on forever.
It was on the channel with the Super Bowl?
With the Super Bowl, yeah. It was
so
on
every time they had a break and needed a filler, they
yeah,
played
I was the filler. Local homosexual who has custody of his children, and it was really a negative way it was put out.
On that morning after the Super Bowl Sunday, that next Monday morning, what did he have to say?
Well, his assistant manager said, you're going to be fired because it's going to be you should have had our permission in the first place, and you should be, you know, people aren't going to understand this at all. Well, I couldn't even work in the check stand. Everybody wanted to shake my hand. They wanted to tell me how great it was.
The customers who came in. And they saw you on TV.
Right, because they saw me on TV, and, you know, they were just...
And one of them was a city commissioner.
Right. Mildred Schwab was a city commissioner, and she pulled me to one side, and the assistant manager was on the other side trying to listen to what she was going to say, and she, in blue language, as she was very well known to do, told him to come around there and be a man. He was a coward. I was not a coward. I came out, you know, and she was, you know, she had her arm around me, and she was just very proud of me. And it was like, it was very affirming because I realized I'm on the right path.
This program is about Jim's story. It's about the church that dealt with the challenge of homosexual members. It is the story of other courageous families of gay children and gay members who are deeply Christian and want to be accepted in the church that they have always known and accepted as they truly are.
It's also a story of human beings who love God and want to be a part of their Christian church community, to love and serve the Lord as they always have.
I think like any other thing that you learn, you have to be taught. And I think in homosexuality, you have to be taught about it if you're not part of that. And I think that I've been blessed by having some wonderful teachers who are gay, who have taken the, I guess, challenge to help me understand what it feels like to be gay and what it means to be gay. My friend Kirby is gay and came to my house when he was moving west and spent a week with us. And on about the second morning, he told me he was gay. And I remember Kirby and I sitting at the table and talking for 3 hours about that. I learned a lot of things I didn't know before. If I wouldn't have been willing to learn, I'd have never known what it felt like to be gay, because I am not gay.
When we moved here to Portland, shortly after we were in the church, and one of the issues came up of whether there was a gay man could become a member of the church. And so that was the first time we began to talk about issues of who could belong to the church and who couldn't belong to the church. And lots of discussion, some of it very negative, some of it very positive, but struggling to understand what the Bible would talk about, homosexuality, and where you come out at. And subsequently, we agreed to let this man become a member of the church here, and so that was our first experience until then we got the request from the Brethren Mennonite Council to join them as an open and affirming congregation.
In 1983, for several years, the annual conference had discussed a human sexuality paper, and one of the contentious pieces of it was homosexuality. In 1983, that paper came before annual conference, and we were there as a family, and Shell would have been 15 years old at the time. And I remember after there was a key piece of the paper that did not pass. It had to do with being accepting of covenantal relationships between members of the same sex. That piece did not pass, and I remember we were sitting around a table after the vote, and Michelle said she was rather dismayed about the fact that that had not passed. And she said, well, I'm really sorry, I think that I might be gay. I think I might be a lesbian. And that was our first inkling, I believe.
When I was 15 was the annual conference where I sat in on the adult business sessions because of the human sexuality paper. And I remember being really upset about some of the comments that were made because I had been realizing this really is who I am. And for the first time I voiced it aloud. And maybe the reason my dad doesn't remember is because he wasn't in the conversation, because I remember Mom being there. Mm-hmm. And at the time she was like, well, it may just be a phase because you haven't really dated anybody or you haven't been interested. And so once again I kind of was like, well, that's true, and put it on the back burner because I was busy with school and sports and, you know, hanging out with friends. And it wasn't until I got to college that it started really solidifying and saying, okay, this is who I am. And I can't just keep pretending it doesn't exist anymore.
My perception is that Peace Church people, it was just the same Shell that it had always been and still is. And I think people pretty much accepted her for who she was. In the broader church, I think she would be blackballed in lots of congregations, would not be welcome, and I'm sad for that. But to me, it wasn't a shock one way or the other. It was just a declaration, and I'm really glad that she was strong enough to come out and talk to us about it. And it has turned out to be not a big thing for us in our life, or a big thing for us at church. It's not a divisive issue there.
When I was interviewed prior to coming as pastor, I was asked how I would feel about being a pastor for gay and lesbian people. So it was clearly something that the church had dealt with to some degree.
Early in your tenure at Peace Church, you received a letter from the Brethren Mennonite Council?
For gay and lesbian concerns. Mm-hmm.
And they were asking what?
They were, among some other churches in both denominations, they were asking if we would explore being more open about being an open and affirming, welcoming congregation for gay and lesbian people. At least at some level, would we be willing to talk about it? Would we be willing to declare ourselves? And so I took that letter to the church board to talk about it. Prior to that meeting, I was approached by one of our older members, a deacon in the church, and he had been approached by a number of other older people in the congregation who were really not comfortable with what we were doing at all and felt that it was not according to Scripture. And they had written a letter and given it to him, which he told me he wanted to talk to me about it before taking any action, which I thought was a highly responsible act on his part. We spent a half a day or more talking about it. And as a result of that conversation, I felt like there was more conversation, more relationship building that needed to happen, and I wasn't sure exactly how it would unfold, but I felt like it would really be divisive to the church and premature to force the issue at the October meeting. So I recommended to the board that we put it on hold, that it be clear that it was being put on hold, that it wasn't going to go away, and that we would deal with it at some point in the future. And so the board agreed to that, but understandably the parents of the daughter were upset because it was clear to them what the right thing to do would be, and they felt like we should just do the right thing. And I understand that point of view. But I felt like as pastor, I was pastor to everyone, and that it was important to try to bring some reconciliation between the points of view and have further conversation and study before we brought it to a vote. I was kind of trusting the Spirit in this process to help me understand when it would be the right time. And it so happened that this daughter that we've mentioned wrote to me. She was away at college. And she wrote to me and said that she had come to terms with her sexuality and realized that she was a lesbian and that she wanted to come out to the congregation. And I talked to her and told her that it was entirely up to her whether we did it this way, but that if she felt comfortable with it, it might be an opportunity to help the congregation move another step towards making this decision about where we stood. Because so often people's minds and hearts are changed when they know someone that they'd known this person their entire lives in the church. She'd grown up in this church, and they knew her, and even though they also knew Jim and Kirby, it just, I felt like might be the time to further the conversation, and she agreed to that. So she wrote a letter, I wrote a letter, her parents wrote a letter, which we circulated to the congregation prior to her coming home for Christmas break. And she invited people to talk to her while she was home if they wanted to have conversation with her about it. And I don't know how many people did, but I think that series of letters from her parents, who were well-respected members of the congregation, and from her and from me as pastor, helped to move things along so that people were more ready to have conversation about it.
How has the church been supportive of you or not supportive of you?
I think I was worried at the time that there were some people that would not, they hadn't been longtime members, and I think I was afraid at one point that they would be uncomfortable with their children being around me. So I had some worries, and it was kind of nice when I came back from college to start coming to church more often and realize, oh, okay, nothing's changed, everything's still pretty much the same. So my experience has been that the church has been very supportive, but I know a lot of that is because I grew up in the church and people had known me, a lot of people had known me since I was 5. And so I was kind of their kid, regardless of anything else. And over the years, it's pretty much been a non-issue for me. I know there have been a few people who weren't real excited about it, but I never got the cold shoulder from them. But again, you know, it's like I was the kid they'd seen grow up. So for them, it was like, well, it's still the same person she always was.
Brethren don't want to live in secrecy and fear. They want to worship and participate in their church as fully open and honest members of the community.
If they're brothers and sisters in Christ, take the time to learn about their story. They will learn that sexual orientation is not a changeable aspect of life, and gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender Christians strive to live a godly life in the Jesus way.
As we close, I am reminded of Paul's letter to the Romans. In chapter 14, he writes, "Why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Or you, why do you despise your brother or sister? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. So then, each of us will be accountable to God. Let us therefore no longer pass judgment on one another." And now for the good news. Today, Peace Church of the Brethren of Portland, Oregon is a welcoming and affirming congregation with a strong commitment to Christian principles and an active program of sharing our faith in the community. We can say that we have survived the challenge. In fact, we have been blessed and are thriving because of it. I am Brent Carlson.
And I'm Beth Merrill. Wishing you peace.
I have a neighbor who was born in Peru. Her parents adopted her when she was just 2. Each time I see them, their joy shines through. In their house it is filled with love. Love makes a family, so many ways that we can be. I want the whole wide world to see that love makes a family. I have a friend whose parents live far apart. At first she would say that it was breaking her heart, but after some time she can finally start to find 2 houses filled with love. Love makes a family, so many ways that we can be. I want the whole wide world to see that love makes a family. The kids up the street have 2 moms and no dad. Some people tease them, they say that it's bad. The way people treat them, it makes me so mad, 'cause their house, it is filled with love. Love makes a family, so many ways that we can be. I want the whole wide world to see that love makes a family. A couple I know have no kids of their own.